The questions of how people understand people and what kind of objects people are to people can be explored in many ways. We're going to look at three different kinds of theoretical formulation that have addressed this, and none of them is adequate to the task, but each of them contributes something, as so often in cognitive science. The first two we're going to look at in this video are strongly individualistic and representational in character. So they understand the brain of me to be independent of the brain of you, and the brain of me to be generating my cognition, experiences, emotions, and what have you. There will be problems with these, but that is the standard framework within which we understand ourselves. So we need to distinguish these. Theory is the oldest of these. It goes back at least until the 1950s. And it's a general sort of approach to understanding humans as organizing their domains of knowledge. So it's not just specifically for figuring out other people. It suggests that what people do in any domain is try to make sense of it as if they were mini scientists. That is, by trying to generate predictions and test those predictions and see what works and see what doesn't, as if they were building a theory of the domain. And the motivation for this stems from perceived shortcomings in both category theory, where a distinction we haven't met yet, but we will do, between exemplars and prototypes seems to be problematic, and developmental theory, which we've met through the different lenses of Piaget and Vygotsky, no one of which can produce a sufficiently all-encompassing story to satisfy. And theory suggests that we are more than simply drawing generalizations from the statistics of the things we've met in the world. That's a sort of a passive mode of interacting with the world. On the view of theory, we are more creative than that, and we induce beliefs about other people based on our experience with them. And this suggests a common way of dealing with complex situations which extends from the life world of the infant to the life world of the adult. Indeed, here you are creatively generalizing from these lectures in order to make sense of yourself, hopefully. In theory, another person is complex, we need to understand people we meet, and it suggests that we would explain or predict someone else's behavior by relying on a theory. We don't know how we got it, but a theory of how people generally behave, motivated by such folk psychological notions as beliefs and desires that are assumed to cause behavior. So this suggests that I will draw inferences about you and your mental states based on my understanding of what a mental state is, based on my theory of mind. Some references that allude to this approach are given there. And it grew out of the very strongly entrenched idea that has gone nowhere, it's still with us today, which I could just call folk psychology. And that is that people are simply to be explained by attributing beliefs, intentions, and desires to them. And they sort of make more sense if we do that. There are severe limitations to this, and people are not going to be fully captured by such a simplistic rendering. On the other hand, the vocabulary of beliefs, intentions, and desires turns out to be part of the way that we discuss other people. We say, why did he do that? He had a mistaken belief, or his intentions were such and such, or he just wanted something. So this accords fairly well with our everyday way of talking about ourselves. It has given rise to a specific elaboration in the work of Simon Baron-Cohen. You've heard that name before, right? He's the brother of Ali G in Borat, Sacha Baron Cohen. His brother, Simon, is a neuroscientist, and he suggested that the social problems experienced by autistic individuals might be best understood as a deficit in this ability to form theories of other people, to internally hypothesize and attribute beliefs, desires, and intentions to other people. So-called deficit in mind reading. This is one of very many approaches to trying to understand autism, which is a poorly defined topic and can be approached in many ways. This may sound a little squishy, but one way to see the benefits of this kind of approach is that it can be operationalized. And here, for example, is a standard test that's used by psychologists in order to see at what stage children are in their consideration of other people. At about age 3 to 4, children pass a threshold beyond which they can solve the task that we'll now view, and before which they fail it. So imagine you're a developmental psychologist and you have a child with you, and you show them this story. There's Sally has a basket and Anne has a box. Sally has a marble. She puts the marble into her basket, and Sally goes out for a walk. Anne takes the marble out of the basket and puts it in the box. Now Sally comes back. She wants to play with her marble. Where will Sally look for the marble? Now, you're already past that threshold of 3 to 4, so you know that she's probably going to look in the bag and be disappointed. You say that because you think that Sally will have formed a belief that that's where her marble is. She wasn't witness to the transfer of the marble, so when she comes back, that belief will guide her intentions. The child who has not passed this stage will look at this and will simply say she'll look in the box because that's where the marble is. So in order to solve this task, you have to be able to think about thinking. You have to be able to represent for yourself in some way what's going on with Sally as she leaves and then as she comes back. This test is so standard, it's very easy to administer to children, and it provides one way of noting one of those Piagetian thresholds that in the normal course of events we expect everyone to pass. There have been elaborations of this approach. Theory has been extended to suggest that, well, that's not only how we figure out other people, but that's how we figure out ourselves as well. That is, that you have no direct knowledge of how you function or what kind of a being you are, but that you form a belief or a theory about yourself having beliefs or theories. First person mind reading. So this is an interesting and somewhat perplexing approach to self-knowledge. So theory was around for a long time, both as a general approach to understanding how humans deal with cognitively complex domains, and specifically looking at how humans figure each other out. It had a counterpart still in the domain of individualistic psychology with representations, and this arose in the 1980s. And by this stage, the computer metaphor had taken hold very, very strongly. All the talk in psychology was now of information processing. That kind of talk came after the development of theory. Theory is rooted in nothing but the vague idea that beliefs, desires, and intentions might be things we can appeal to. But here in the 1980s, with a whole bunch of new metaphors, people are thinking of the brain as if it were some kind of a computer. And in simulation theory, it was suggested that, well, we don't have to theorize about other people's cognitive states because we go through, we experience similar states ourselves, and we could imagine them, if you like, mentally simulate the experiences of others. If the brain, so this is all computational thinking here, if we understand the brain as being a computing engine, it's got computing resources, a lot of them are tied up in getting on with the world, those are online stuff, but we can think about things that are not here, and so we could devote some of them to simulating, running a simulation of another mind. So rather than constructing a theory of other minds, we simulate them, both the psychological states and the processes. And because you and I are similar beings, my cognitive apparatus and experience of the world should be sufficient to simulate yours. I don't think this would have gone very far. It entails an enormous commitment to a very specific and literal interpretation of the brain as a computer. And it's very, very vague about what the notion of simulating someone else is. That's jargon that is inspired by computers, but if you look at it too hard, it starts to fall apart. And so this probably would have lived and died in the 1980s, but in the 1990s, something happened. There was a discovery in an Italian laboratory working on monkey brains that gave rise to the announcement that a new kind of neuron had been discovered. These are called mirror neurons. We will meet these in the next major section of this module. We'll meet mirror neurons, but they were extremely exciting to a certain stripe of researcher who had certain computational commitments. They were neurons that seemed to be sensitive to the similarity between my goal-directed actions and your goal-directed actions. Neurons that behave similarly if I go to do something that has a clear goal, and if I merely see you go to do something that also has a clear goal. Mirror neurons gave rise to an awful lot of hype. They were probably one of the most over-touted findings in neuroscience. We still don't know whether they exist. We don't know what they are. Do they exist, or should we appeal to a mirror neuron system? But they became wildly, wildly popular, and they rejuvenated simulation theory because the vague notion of simulation seemed to map onto this novel discovery in monkey brains. So both of these approaches, simulation theory and theory theory, currently coexist. Theory theory is much older and predates the computer metaphor. Simulation theory is couched strongly in the computer metaphor. And various people, as always, will have tried to blend the two approaches, to combine them and produce hybrid models with, for example, low-level automatic mirroring. That might be the way that in which, if you're standing with a particular stance or with your arms folded and I'm talking to you, I unconsciously imitate your movements, together with high-level reasoning, which is more like theory theory. Both approaches, psychological, they both depend on the existence of an independent psychological subject where goings-on in the brain are all about the individual themselves. They are, to that extent, they can be critiqued as being prey to the same problem as Descartes' cogito. They reify the mind as if it were separate from everything else, and they are thus pointing towards solipsistic sort of interpretations of experience. And what they both fail to recognize is the reciprocity that characterizes social cognition. That was the link between the interacting brains that we noted in the last video. And that's where the third approach is going to go in the next video. I'll just point out that this problem of discrete individual minds treated as if they were independent of the world, we already met it in the trailer for Being John Malkovich, which showed that it was a little incoherent. You might, because I like giving movie recommendations, you might be reminded also of the Alfred Hitchcock movie Rear Window, in which James Stewart, the actor, is holed up because he's broken his leg, and so he can't go anywhere. He's immobilized, and he's staring at the activities of others. He can peer in through a lot of windows in the courtyard using a telescope or a camera, and he sees all kinds of things. I won't spoil the movie for you, but it's that voyeuristic stance where you can see without taking part. That's what's been criticized when we caution against the solipsistic nature of both theory theory and simulation theory.